Stay right here for our final news roundup and information overload.
All right, news roundup and information overload hour. Toll free. Our number is 800-941-SEAN if you want to be a part of the program. We've been talking a lot today about media corruption, how wrong they are on so many big stories. All these people that was so wrong for years and years about Donald Trump, every issue pretty much involving Donald Trump, but especially the Russia collusion lie. We learned last week that masks were totally, completely ineffective in spite of what the government was telling us. We have the whole Wuhan lab controversy. Yeah, we knew they studied coronaviruses, and we knew that lab was involved in gain-of-function research, but everybody tried to tell us it was anything but the Wuhan virology lab. And if you dared to say that, which we had no problem asking the questions, you were labeled a conspiracy theorist. Every single major issue that comes up, ABC, CBS, NBC, MSDNC, CNN, fake news, the Washington Post, New York Times, they're wrong. When the lab leak story broke, once we started to put together the origins of COVID, there were people brave enough to tell us the likely source of this. One of them was Senator Tom Cotton of the great state of Arkansas. And when he did tell us about that Wuhan lab, and remember, NIH money funneled through the EcoHealth Alliance, your tax dollars actually went to that Wuhan virology lab, meaning we helped pay for it in some capacity. They attacked, Senator Cotton for suggesting that what we now know to be true as a conspiracy theory. Just here's a reminder.
Senator Tom Cotton actually closed his office this morning, calling it the Wuhan virus as he did so. And he has, of course, been out in public talking about conspiracy theories, frankly, as to where the virus came from.
Tom Cotton a couple of days ago spouting a conspiracy theory that the Chinese made this virus up.
You got the lab in Wuhan.
Giving just the whiff of credibility there on television and on social media to a conspiracy theory going around that the coronavirus originated and was perhaps man-made inside a lab in China.
Okay, Senator Tom Cotton joins us now. Have you got any calls, any apologies, Senator?
Sean, it's good to be on with you. I think they must not have my phone number, or I can't get through to my voicemail because I've not gotten any calls from all those folks at CNN and MSNBC and New York Times and Washington Post. Sean, it's bad enough that in the winter of 2020, as this virus was reaching our shores, and I pointed out just the common sense observation that most Arkansans would have, that this virus almost certainly came from the lab right up the street where the research bat-based coronavirus is, and which was known to have sloppy safety practices. Or at a minimum, we should be asking the question that they accuse me and you and people like us of engaging in conspiracy theorizing or being racist or nativist or xenophobic. That's all bad enough. But now 3 years later, when even the Biden administration is beginning to acknowledge that...
Well, not everybody. I noticed they have Jake Sullivan, they have Karine Jean-Pierre, and one other spokesperson still saying they're not sure, which is total BS.
So I think for a lot of these politicians, what they're doing is not just covering for themselves rhetorically because they repeated the same lines like Joe Biden did, but they're also worried about covering up the tracks of what left-wing bureaucrats like Tony Fauci did to fund some of the research at the Wuhan labs. And they don't want that to be exposed, especially now that the Republican House is looking into it. But then you get into the media, I think a lot of them are just so stubborn and so ideological and so dedicated to the party line that their view is like if Tom Cotton or Sean Hannity or Donald Trump says it, then it must be wrong. We have to fight back against it. Whatever it is, they have no interest in getting to the truth. They certainly have no interest in holding Chinese communists accountable for all the pain and hardship they inflicted on the American people and the civilized world.
Yeah, listen, we all live through the same thing. If you're a conservative, you're just fair game. I mean, it's amazing, people lying about me, saying that I advocated things that I never advocated, never even talked about. And they just make it up out of whole cloth and, just to slam and slander. So at the end of the day, this is important because we're watching China. We see their territorial ambitions on display as they continue to fly their fighter jets over Taiwan. I don't think Joe Biden will lift a finger to help Taiwan if that, quote, moment of reunification, as China calls it, occurs. We see what they're doing with intellectual property theft. We see their unfair trade practices. We now, for some reason, and maybe you can explain this to me, Senator, why is our country allowing China and Chinese nationals to buy up thousands and thousands of acres of farmland and ranch land, often near military installations? And of course, then we have the little old balloon incident that Joe Biden allowed to have happen for 8 straight days.
Well, so Sean, all these things are of a piece together. They all reflect Joe Biden's desire to bend over backwards for Chinese communists, to apologize for their behavior and excuse it, sometimes even act as their lawyer. You mentioned the Chinese balloon. You had administration officials hypothesizing that, maybe it got blown off course by strong wind. Well, that must have been one heck of a wind to blow it from Guam all the way to Alaska. It's the same reason that they won't come out and say the Chinese communists almost certainly caused this pandemic by allowing viruses to leak from that laboratory using shoddy laboratory practices and extremely dangerous research. They will continue to bend over backwards to appease and coddle the Chinese communists, kowtowing to them, when we should be doing some of the things you laid out, like banning Chinese nationals from buying our farmland. No,
I think we should even go further. I think anybody from China that bought any of our land, I think it's a national security threat, and I think it's a perfect case for eminent domain. Now, they could either pay them back, or that could be part of the compensation for unleashing COVID on the United States and the rest of the world. And I think we should just take our land back and say, no, thank you, go back to China.
Yeah, and that's doubly true when it's next to sensitive military sites. You recently, thankfully, saw the local government in Grand Forks, North Dakota, rejected an application by Chinese-affiliated companies to build a major agricultural facility, which just happened to provide line-of-sight access in the Grand Forks Air Force Base.
By the way, do you think any American could ever buy farmland, ranch land, or land near Chinese military installations in China? Do you think that would ever be allowed?
Well, the question answers itself. And what most Americans are going to seek with China, like any country, is basic reciprocity. If China won't let us do it there, why would we let them do it here?
That's a great question. Let me switch topics on you here for a second. So in 2020, the New York Times published your op-ed calling for the United States to put an end to the riots in the summer of 2020. Now, we had 574 official riots. We had thousands of injured police officers. We had billions of dollars in property damage, and we had dozens of dead Americans. That was the result of the summer of 2020. So you called for the United States in your op-ed in the New York Times for this country to put an end to the violent riots. They were not peaceful protests. They were violent riots. But now there's a new book that came out, and apparently you really stirred things up among the snowflakes of the New York Times, and woke New York Times employees were furious that they even printed your letter. One staffer accused his colleagues of acting like a bloodthirsty mob, demanding someone be fired for green lighting your op-ed. Another staffer openly weeping and lamenting that none of his friends would talk to him or anything because he worked for a company that published something written by a sitting Republican senator. And by the way, around the same time, you were getting bashed because you were telling the truth about COVID. I mean, I'm sitting here in shock. I mean, are people that sensitive, hypersensitive? Are they that, woke that they can't even read an alternative viewpoint? Which, by the way, you were making perfect sense because we didn't lift a finger to stop those riots. Yeah.
So Sean, that was only a couple months after the controversy over my common sense assertion the lab was the most likely source for this virus. And what I was saying in that op-ed was supported by a sizable majority of Americans. I said that if local police cannot restore order, or in some cities, Sean, if they're not allowed to restore order by Democratic politicians, then President Trump should use the Insurrection Act to restore order, and that the American people had a right to expect that. And again, supported by a majority of the American people. But all of these liberals at places like the New York Times and CNN and MSNBC live in such a bubble, so insulated from normal Americans who hold normal traditional viewpoints, that they think that literally any kind of words that cause them to disagree is violence. That's what they kept saying. This op-ed puts my life at risk. These words are violence. And it's because they've been raised in this bubble in their precious elite schools and colleges to think that they are the only ones who have a proper viewpoint. They've not been exposed to conservatives like you and me, or just to normal Americans who want to go about living their life. And therefore, they react hysterically and break down when they have to confront arguments that are supported by a majority of the American people.
Then they spent endless amounts of time, hours and hours, primetime television, going through the January 6th riot, which, by the way, on this radio show, just so you know, I was condemning it in real time. I don't support violence of any kind. I don't support any of these riots. And we have to protect our elected officials, and we have to protect our institutions. Here's the problem. They were so fixated on their predetermined conclusion that they were going to bash Trump. We're now learning things like the Capitol Police Chief requesting numerous times that the guard be called up. We're now learning that there was intelligence in the weeks leading up to January 6th that should have alerted everybody for the need for proper security that day. We never got Nancy Pelosi, the Sergeant at Arms, the Capitol Police Chief, Muriel Bowser. They didn't look over their text messages, their emails, their phone records. They never asked Muriel Bowser why she just out of nowhere rejected the use of the guard in her district, which she had the power to do. Nobody ever got deep into what intelligence they had and what threats they knew about that they didn't take seriously. That to me would be a failure of intelligence gathering, or a failure to act on good intelligence.
Yeah, Sean, so I want to commend Speaker McCarthy for his commitment to tell the full story about what happened that day and how it happened, because I don't think the House Democrat show trials over the last 2 years even scratched the surface of a lot of the things you just touched. I also want to point out that it's just another example of the one-sided enforcement of the law. We recently had Merrick Garland, the Attorney General, in front of one of my committees. And I pointed out that we had left-wing protesters in front of justices' homes last summer, and not a single one has been arrested and charged with an offense. And these are not criminal masterminds. I mean, they advertise these protests in advance, which are plainly a violation of federal law. They posted videos and pictures of themselves on their social media accounts. It would take an agent today, probably just a couple hours, to identify some of them and go arrest them and charge them with this offense. Yet not a single arrest and charges happen because Merrick Garland is sympathetic to those protesters in favor of abortion, whereas he spent millions of man-hours tracing down not just the violent criminals who broke into the Capitol on January 6th, but also the grandmas who were just walking around.
Well, you know what the worst part of this is, Senator? You know, we could have learned, what we should do to protect our Capitol, the People's House. We should have learned what measures need to be implemented to protect every elected official. I don't care if you're a Democrat or a Republican. I mean, you need protection. I would have thought that maybe they do to the Capitol what they do at the White House, create a perimeter, put those cement blocks so people can't drive a car through it, and then put up a wrought iron fence like they have in front of the White House, and that would keep people out as well. And then put more security on the outside at the ready in case, God forbid, a group of people try to breach the Capitol ever again.
Yeah, and Sean, you make a lot of important points about questions that need to be asked. We all saw on the night of January 6th how quickly the no-scale anti-riot temporary fencing was erected around the Capitol. Obviously, it could have been erected on January 5th or the morning of January 6th if all of the different law enforcement agencies involved and the intelligence agencies involved had been communicating properly and taking the threat as seriously as some seem to have taken it. So these are all questions that, like I said, I commend Speaker McCarthy for getting to the bottom to.
All right, quick break. More with Senator Tom Cotton of Arkansas on the other side. 800-941-SEAN, our number. Also, one of the FBI whistleblowers coming up straight ahead.
Lucky Land Casino, asking people, what's the weirdest place you've gotten lucky?
Lucky? In line at the deli, I guess?
Aha, in my dentist's office. More than once, actually.
Do I have to say?
Yes, you do.
In the car before my kids' PTA meeting.
Really?
Yes.
Excuse me, what's the weirdest place you've gotten lucky?
I never win and tell.
Well, there you have it. You can get lucky anywhere, playing at LuckyLandSlots.com. Play for free right now. Are you feeling lucky? No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18+. Terms and conditions apply. See website for details.
It's the Marketer's Report. This week, Patrizia Spagnoletto, Global Chief Marketing Officer, Direct-to-Consumer for Warner Brothers Discovery, weighs in on the difficult task of building and retaining consumer trust.
Trust is a really hard thing to build and a really easy thing to destroy, and we have to be very respectful about that. Our partnership with iHeart has really helped us build that trust and that relationship with the on-air talent. The best thing for us to do is to build a relationship with our consumers. And if those consumers have a relationship with the DJs that are on air, then we want to build on that. House of the Dragon, which was one of our most successful, if not the most successful campaign we've ever done for a show, audio was a core part of that.
As the #1 audio company, iHeartMedia gives you access to all. Every audience, live conversations, trusted influencers, and the insights and data you need to grow. Not just a media company, iHeartMedia is your access company. Go to iHeartResults.com for more.
Leftovers. Or the DMV.
Number 97.
Or house cleaning. Or
Chumba Casino always brings the fun. Play over 100 different games online for free from anywhere. You could redeem some serious prizes. ChumbaCasino.com. Live the Chumba life. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18+ terms and conditions apply. See website for details.
All right, we continue with Senator Tom Cotton from the great state of Arkansas. You were right in the summer of 2020. I mean, Donald Trump, I remember, offered the National Guard repeatedly to cities like Portland and others, and they kept rejecting it. I don't know if you remember, I did an interview with Horace Lorenzo Anderson Sr. He lost his son, his namesake, in the Chop Chaz Summer of Love spaghetti potluck dinner zone. And, you know, his life, he did not need to die, but they let these lunatics take over an entire city blocks, including a police precinct.
Yeah, and they did so again, just like Merrick Garland has refused to charge anyone who protested in a Supreme Court justice home because they sympathize with us. That can never be the basis for law enforcement. I think that we should arrest and prosecute people who violated the law on January 6th. I think we should arrest and prosecute people who violated the law outside the homes of Supreme Court justices.
You and I agree. Senator Tom Cotton, great state of Arkansas. Thank you, sir, for being with us. We appreciate it.